Robert Bobby Fleming stood in his garage workshop, the scent of motor oil and metal shavings filling his nostrils as he tightened the final bolt on Mrs. Henderson's vintage Camaro. At 42, Bobby still carried the lean, disciplined frame of his Army Ranger days, though 15 years of civilian life had softened some of the harder edges. His calloused hands moved with practiced precision, the same hands that had once dismantled IEDs in Afghanistan now coaxing life back into classic engines. The sound of Linda's BMW pulling into the driveway broke his concentration. She was home earlier than usual from her job at the upscale real estate agency downtown. Through the garage window, he watched his wife of 18 years step out, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the humid Georgia afternoon. She had been working late more frequently these past 6 months, claiming the luxury home market was booming and her clients demanded evening showings. "Bobby," Linda called, her voice carrying that artificial cheerfulness he'd grown to recognize. "I'm home." Their twins, Ashley and Tyler, both 17, barely looked up from their phones as Linda entered through the kitchen. Bobby dried his hands on a shop rag and joined his family, noting how Linda avoided his eyes while bustling around the kitchen island. "How was your day?" he asked, genuinely interested despite the growing distance between them. "Oh, you know, the usual chaos. The Pimpton mansion finally got an offer, and I had to coordinate with 3 different attorneys." She paused, finally meeting his gaze. "Actually, Bobby, we need to talk about something. The kids and I have been discussing your upcoming birthday." Ashley looked up from her phone, exchanging a glance with Tyler that Bobby caught but couldn't decipher. There was something rehearsed about this moment, like actors hitting their marks. "My birthday is not for another week," Bobby said slowly. "What's there to discuss?" "Well," Linda's smile became strained, "we want to make it special. Really special." Bobby had met Linda 20 years ago at a VA benefit dinner in Atlanta. She was volunteering, helping veterans transition to civilian life, and her genuine warmth had drawn him like a beacon. She had listened to his struggles with purpose after leaving the Rangers, never judging when he took blue-collar jobs instead of pursuing the college degree everyone said he needed. When he started his automotive restoration business, she had been his biggest supporter, even working weekends to help with the books. The woman standing before him now felt like a stranger wearing his wife's face. "Dad," Tyler spoke up, his voice carrying an odd formality, "we know you've been working really hard. Maybe it's time for you to take a break, see new places. Bobby's instincts, honed by years of sensing danger in unfamiliar territories, began to prickle. "What kind of new places?" he asked. Linda moved to the kitchen window, her back to him. "We just think you've been so focused on work, on this house, on us. Maybe it would be good for you to have some space to explore who you are outside of all this responsibility." The words hit Bobby like shrapnel. In the military, he'd learned to read people's intentions through their body language, their tone, the things they didn't say. Every signal he was receiving now screamed deception. "You want me to leave?" he asked quietly. "Not leave," Ashley said quickly, though her voice wavered. "Just take time for yourself. Mom says you never got to travel after the Army, never got to be young and free." Bobby studied his daughter's face, seeing guilt there, but also something else. Anticipation. His son couldn't meet his eyes at all. "And you all came up with this idea together?" Bobby asked. "We want what's best for you, Dad," Tyler mumbled. Linda turned from the window, and for just a moment Bobby caught something in her expression, relief mixed with impatience. She wanted him gone. Not for his sake, but for hers. "Think about it," Linda said. "You've been the provider, the protector, the responsible one for so long. Don't you want to see what else is out there?" Bobby nodded slowly, his mind already working. 20 years of marriage, 18 years of raising kids, building a business from nothing, supporting Linda through her career, changes and dreams. And now they wanted him to just disappear. "I'll think about it," he said finally. That night, lying in bed next to Linda, Bobby stared at the ceiling and listened to her breathing. She was still awake. He could tell by the rhythm, but she was pretending to sleep. He thought about their early years when they'd stayed up talking until dawn about their dreams and fears. When had those conversations stopped? He thought about Ashley's first steps, Tyler's little league games, family camping trips to the mountains. He thought about working 16-hour days to build his business, turning down lucrative contracts that would take him away from family dinners. He thought about Linda's recent client meetings that ran past midnight. In the darkness, Bobby Fleming began to understand that the life he'd fought so hard to build and protect was already over. The question now was what he would build from the ashes. 3 days later, Bobby sat in his pickup truck across the street from Bella Vista, the expensive Italian restaurant where Linda claimed to be having a business dinner. Through the large windows, he could see her at a corner table, but she wasn't with clients. She was with a man Bobby recognized from the society pages of the local newspaper, Gregory Winters, heir to the Winter construction fortune, and recently divorced from his socialite wife. Winters was everything Bobby wasn't. Tall, where Bobby was average height, polished, where Bobby was rough around the edges. Inherited wealth, where Bobby had earned every dollar through sweat and skill. He watched as Winters reached across the table to touch Linda's hand. Bobby saw his wife, still wearing her wedding ring, lean into the gesture with familiar intimacy. Bobby felt something cold settle in his chest. It wasn't heartbreak. That would come later. This was recognition. The enemy had revealed himself. He'd done enough reconnaissance in difficult places to know that information was power. Instead of storming into the restaurant or confronting Linda at home, Bobby began to gather intelligence. He installed a small tracking device, military surplus from his army contacts, on Linda's BMW. He activated phone monitoring software on their shared family plan, something Linda had forgotten existed. He began documenting her movements, her calls, her text messages. What he discovered painted a picture that made his jaw clench with suppressed rage. The affair had been going on for 8 months. Linda had met Winters when she listed his ex-wife's mansion after their divorce. The flirtation had quickly escalated into clandestine meetings, expensive gifts, and promises of a new life together. But there was a problem. Winters wanted Linda all to himself. And the prenup from his previous marriage meant he couldn't afford another expensive divorce if he remarried too quickly. The solution, according to their text exchanges, was elegant in its cruelty. They would convince Bobby to leave voluntarily, make him think it was his idea, his chance for freedom. Once he was gone and enough time had passed, Linda would file for divorce on grounds of abandonment. She'd get half of everything Bobby had built. The house, the business, the savings, while Winters maintained his inheritance intact. But the most devastating revelation came in a voice message Linda had left for Winters. "The kids are completely on board. I've explained how much happier they'll be with Gregory's resources. Private school, college funds, connections their father could never provide. Tyler especially sees the advantages. He's tired of being embarrassed by his blue-collar dad." Bobby sat in his truck outside the restaurant, watching his wife laugh at something Winters said, and felt the last vestiges of the man he'd been die away. What emerged in that moment was something harder, colder, something forged in the crucible of betrayal. He thought about Ashley's odd behavior, Tyler's inability to meet his eyes, Linda's sudden concern for his freedom. They'd all been acting, manipulating him with surgical precision. His own children, the people he'd worked himself to the bone to provide for, were willing participants in this elaborate deception. That night, Bobby called his old army buddy, Marcus Chun, who now ran a private security firm in Atlanta. "I need a favor," Bobby said without preamble when Marcus answered. "Bobby, wow, it's been what, 3 years? What's going on?" Marcus said. "I need a complete background check on someone. Gregory Winters, and I need it done quietly." There was a pause. "Winters, as in winter construction? Bobby, what are you getting yourself into?" "Just finding out who I'm dealing with." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "All right, but Bobby, whatever you're planning, be careful. Rich boys like Winters have lawyers and connections. They don't fight fair." Bobby smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Neither do I." Over the next few days, Bobby played his role perfectly. He seemed to consider Linda's suggestion about taking time for himself. He asked thoughtful questions about travel, about discovering himself, about giving his family space to grow. He watched his wife's relief grow with each conversation, watched his children become more animated as they discussed their future with their mother's wealthy boyfriend. When Marcus called back with Winter's background, Bobby wasn't surprised by what he learned. Gregory Winters was exactly what he appeared to be, a privileged heir who'd coasted through life on his family's money and name. He'd never served his country, never built anything with his own hands, never sacrificed for anyone but himself. He collected expensive cars, charming partners, and exclusive club memberships with equal superficiality. But there was something else in the report, something that made Bobby's predatory smile return. Winters had a weakness, an Achilles heel that could be exploited. He was paranoid about his reputation and his place in Atlanta's social hierarchy. His divorce had already damaged his standing in certain circles, and he was desperate to rebuild his image as a successful, respectable businessman. Bobby began to formulate a plan. "Happy birthday," Linda and the twins shouted as Bobby walked into the kitchen on Saturday morning. The island was decorated with balloons and a store-bought cake, and Ashley held a wrapped box with an elaborate bow. Bobby looked at their eager faces and felt nothing but cold calculation. They were so pleased with themselves, so confident in their deception. He wondered if they'd practiced this moment, rehearsed their lines to make sure the performance was convincing. "Wow," he said, injecting surprise and warmth into his voice. "You guys didn't have to do all this." "Open your present, Dad," Tyler said, bouncing slightly on his feet. The excitement in his voice was real. He was genuinely happy about what they were giving him. Bobby took the box and carefully removed the wrapping paper, drawing out the moment. Inside was a Greyhound bus ticket to Portland, Oregon, dated for the following Monday. A one-way ticket. Portland. Bobby looked up at his family with what he hoped looked like confusion, rather than the storm of fury building in his chest. Linda stepped forward, her face arranged in an expression of loving concern. "We know you've been feeling restless, Bobby. And Portland has such a great art scene. Lots of opportunities for someone with your skills. It could be a fresh start. But my business," Bobby began. "We'll be here when you get back," Linda said quickly. "This isn't permanent. It's just time for you to explore, to see what else is out there." Ashley nodded eagerly. "Mom showed us all these cool places in Portland. There are tons of vintage car collectors there, and the music scene is amazing. And it's perfect for you, Dad." Tyler interrupted. "You always said you wanted to see the Pacific Northwest." Bobby had never said that. He'd never expressed any desire to leave Georgia, his business, or his family. But his children had been so thoroughly convinced by their mother's narrative that they genuinely believed they were giving him a gift. "It's time for you to leave so we can start new lives," Linda said. And for just a moment her mask slipped. The words came out harder than she had intended, with an edge of finality that revealed her true feelings. Bobby looked at the bus ticket again, understanding the full scope of their betrayal. They weren't just asking him to leave, they were throwing him away, like an old appliance that no longer served their needs. "When does it leave?" he asked quietly. "Monday morning," Linda said. "We thought it would be better to do it quickly, like ripping off a Band-Aid." Bobby nodded, folding the ticket carefully. "You know what? You're right." The relief that flooded Linda's face was so obvious that Bobby wondered how he'd missed the signs for so long. "Thank you," he said, looking at each of them in turn. "This is exactly what I needed." He spent Sunday packing a single duffel bag while Linda and the kids went to what they claimed was a movie. Through the tracking app, Bobby knew they were actually at Winters's mansion, probably celebrating their successful manipulation and planning their new life together. Monday morning, Linda drove him to the bus station. She was chattering nervously about keeping in touch and how this was going to be so good for him, and how much she loved him. Bobby listened with half an ear, most of his attention focused on memorizing her face. By the time she saw him again, everything would be different. "I love you too," he lied as she kissed him goodbye. Bobby bought a ticket, waited until Linda's BMW disappeared into traffic, then walked to the airport and caught a flight back to Atlanta under a false ID that Marcus had provided. By evening, he was in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, watching news reports on his phone. For the next week, Bobby was a ghost. He monitored Linda and Winters through the tracking devices and surveillance equipment Marcus had helped him acquire. He watched as Winters moved into his house 3 days after Bobby's supposed departure. He listened to Linda's phone calls with her friends, bragging about her new relationship and her plans to file for divorce. Bobby understood with crystal clarity now what he'd lost, what he'd survived, and how he would make his next move count. He saw his children adapt to their new luxury lifestyle with disturbing ease. On Friday evening, exactly 1 week after his departure, Bobby prepared the box that would change everything. Inside the plain cardboard shipping box, he placed several items: a USB drive containing every text message, email, and recorded phone call between Linda and Winters, printed photographs of their secret meetings over the past 8 months, copies of financial records showing how Linda had been slowly transferring money from their joint accounts to a private account Winters had helped her establish. But the centerpiece was a single item that would strike terror into their hearts: Gregory Winters's expensive Rolex watch, the one he never removed, the one he'd been wearing just hours earlier when Bobby had paid him a very personal visit. Bobby sealed the box and addressed it to Linda Fleming. No return address. He dropped it in a postal box across town and returned to his motel room to wait. Saturday morning, he powered on the phone he'd left behind and waited for the calls to begin. They came within minutes. 43 missed calls from Linda and the kids, 10 more from lawyers, and 17 text messages ranging from panic to threats to desperate pleas. Bobby listened to one voicemail. Linda's voice was shaky, terrified. "Bobby, please call me back. We need to talk. Whatever you're thinking, whatever you're planning, we can work this out. The kids are scared. I'm scared. Please just call me back." He deleted the message without finishing it and turned the phone off again. Phase 1 was complete. The real game was just beginning. Bobby Fleming no longer existed. At least not in any way that mattered to the people searching for him. Using skills he'd learned in the Rangers and connections he'd maintained from his military days, Bobby had become David Mitchell, a freelance automotive consultant with cash savings and no digital footprint. From his position in a surveillance vehicle parked 3 blocks from his former home, Bobby watched through high-powered binoculars as police cars came and went. Detective Ray Morrison, an old acquaintance from Bobby's veteran support group, was leading the investigation into Gregory Winters' disappearance. What the police didn't know, what Linda didn't know, was that Winters wasn't missing. He was exactly where Bobby had left him, in a soundproofed shipping container in an abandoned industrial complex that Marcus's security company used for training exercises. Bobby had been patient, methodical for 3 days after sending the box. He'd studied Winters' patterns, learned his routines, identified his vulnerabilities. The man was predictable. Expensive gym sessions at 6 a.m., coffee at the same upscale cafe, evening drinks at his private club. It had been almost too easy to intercept him in the parking garage of his downtown office building. The chloroform had been unnecessary. A properly applied sleeper hold had dropped Winters without a struggle. Bobby had loaded the unconscious man into a stolen panel van and driven him to the container facility, where he'd welded the door shut and left Winters with enough food and water for several weeks, a bucket for sanitation, and a battery-powered radio for company. Now, watching Detective Morrison interview Linda for the 3rd time, Bobby felt no satisfaction. This wasn't revenge yet. This was just positioning. The real game required all the pieces to be in place. His phone, a burner he'd purchased with cash, buzzed with a text from Marcus. Package delivered to your specifications. Bobby smiled. The 2nd box had been placed. Through his binoculars, he watched Ashley answer the front door and accept a delivery from a courier. This box was addressed to her specifically, and Bobby knew exactly what her reaction would be when she opened it. Inside were photos, not the professional surveillance shots from the first box, but something much more personal and devastating. Pictures of Ashley and Tyler that Bobby had taken over the years, annotated in red ink with details about their daily routines, their school schedules, their friends' addresses, their favorite places to go. The message was clear and terrifying. Someone was watching them. Someone who knew everything about their lives. At the bottom of the box was a single typewritten note. Your father protected you. Who protects you now? Bobby watched through the window as Ashley screamed, saw Linda rush to her daughter's side, watched his son's face go pale as he looked at the photographs. Within minutes, Linda was on the phone with Detective Morrison, her voice shrill with panic. Bobby felt nothing watching his children's terror. They had chosen their side when they chose Winters' money over their father's love. Now they could live with the consequences of that choice. Phase 2 was about isolation. Over the next several days, Bobby systematically dismantled every support system his family had built, using information he'd gathered about Linda's real estate clients. He began making anonymous calls to her agency's biggest accounts, revealing compromising information about her affair and questioning her professional ethics. He leaked details about Winters' business dealings to his competitors, causing several major contracts to fall through. But the psychological pressure was the key. Every day brought new reminders that someone was watching, waiting, planning. A dead rose left on Ashley's car at school. Tyler's locker combination changed mysteriously. Linda's credit cards mysteriously canceled. Small violations of their security that proved how vulnerable they really were. The police investigation into Winters' disappearance was going nowhere, because Bobby had left them nothing to find. The surveillance footage from the parking garage had been mysteriously corrupted. Winters' phone had been found in a dumpster across town, wiped clean. His car had been discovered abandoned at the airport, suggesting he might have fled the city voluntarily. Detective Morrison was competent, but limited by procedure and budget. He couldn't mount a full investigation without evidence of foul play, and Bobby had been careful to ensure that no such evidence existed. Meanwhile, Linda was discovering that her new life wasn't quite as secure as she'd imagined. Without Winter's presence and financial support, the luxury lifestyle she'd been promised was evaporating. The house payments that Winters had been helping with were now solely her responsibility. The private school tuition he'd offered to pay for the twins was suddenly in question. The social connections he provided were withdrawing their invitations. Bobby watched it all from the shadows, documenting his family's growing desperation with the same methodical precision he'd once used to track insurgents in Afghanistan. He was learning things about them that 20 years of marriage had never revealed. Linda's capacity for self-deception was remarkable. Even as her world crumbled around her, she maintained that Winters would return and everything would go back to their plan. Ashley was tougher than he'd given her credit for, adapting to the pressure with a resilience that might have made him proud under different circumstances. Tyler was the weakest link, visibly cracking under the strain of constant fear. 2 weeks after the second box, Bobby made his first direct contact. Using a voice modulator he'd acquired from Marcus, he called the house phone at exactly 3 a.m. Linda answered on the second ring, her voice thick with sleepless anxiety. "Hello. You threw away the best thing you ever had," Bobby said, his voice electronically distorted beyond recognition. "Who is this? What do you want?" "I want you to understand consequences. If you hurt my children, your children made their choice. Now they live with it." Bobby hung up and watched through his binoculars as lights came on throughout the house. As Linda frantically checked locks and peered through curtains, he could see her on the phone with Detective Morrison. Bobby could imagine her hysterical report of the threatening call, but the police couldn't protect them from an enemy they couldn't identify, couldn't locate, couldn't understand. Bobby had learned patience in the desert, learned how to wait for the perfect moment to strike. His family was about to discover that some lessons came too late to matter. 3 weeks after Gregory Winters' disappearance, Linda Fleming was discovering that her carefully planned new life was built on foundations of sand. Bobby watched from his surveillance position as she emerged from the bankruptcy attorney's office, her face pale and drawn. Without Winters' financial support, her attempt to maintain their expensive lifestyle on her real estate income alone was failing catastrophically. The irony wasn't lost on Bobby. For 18 years, he'd been the steady provider, the reliable foundation that allowed Linda and the kids to dream big and reach high. Now, without that support, they were learning the difference between earned security and borrowed luxury. His phone buzzed with an update from Marcus. "Container check complete. Subject still secure, beginning phase 3. Bobby typed back. "Proceed." Phase 3 was about revelation. Winters had been missing long enough for the police investigation to cool down, long enough for Linda to face some hard truths about her situation. Now it was time to show her exactly what she'd lost, and what she'd never truly had. That evening, Bobby made his second phone call to the house. Linda answered on the first ring. "Hello?" Her voice was sharper now, edged with desperation rather than fear. "Have you figured it out yet?" Bobby asked through the voice modulator. "What do you want from us?" "I want you to understand the difference between protection and imprisonment." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Gregory Winters never loved you, Linda. He saw an opportunity, a lonely wife with assets he could access and use. You were his exit strategy from a messy divorce. Nothing more." "That's not true." Check his computer. Password is Lucky Charm 2019, his ex-wife's pet name. Read his emails to his lawyer about asset protection strategies through marriage to someone with clean financials and established property. Read his text messages to his brother about landing the contractor's wife as a business arrangement. Bobby could hear Linda's sharp intake of breath. "You're lying. Look for yourself. The computer is in his home office, second drawer of the desk. You still have access, don't you? He gave you a key before he disappeared." The line went dead. Bobby knew Linda would drive to Winter's mansion that very night and would find exactly what he'd told her to find, because Gregory Winters really had been using her. He really had seen her as nothing more than a convenient tool for protecting his assets. Bobby had simply ensured that the evidence would be easy to find when Linda went looking for it. The next morning, Bobby positioned himself where he could watch Linda's house. She hadn't come home the previous night, and when she finally pulled into the driveway at 8 a.m., her face told the whole story. She'd found Winters's computer, read his correspondence, and understood the truth about their relationship. Through his listening devices, Bobby heard Linda explaining to Ashley and Tyler that Winters might not be coming back, that they needed to prepare for some changes. The kids' reactions were telling. Ashley immediately demanded to know how this would affect her college plans, while Tyler asked if they could still afford their private school tuition. Not one of them expressed concern for Bobby's well-being or regret for their treatment of him. Even facing financial ruin, their primary concerns were still materialistic and self-serving. That afternoon, Detective Morrison paid another visit to the house. Through his surveillance equipment, Bobby listened to the conversation with cold satisfaction. "Mrs. Fleming," Morrison said, "I have to ask you directly. Do you have any reason to believe your husband might be involved in Gregory Winters's disappearance?" Linda's laugh was brittle. "Detective, Bobby left town 3 weeks ago. He's in Portland, Oregon. I drove him to the bus station myself." "Yes, ma'am, you've told me that." "But we checked with Greyhound, and while a Robert Fleming did purchase a ticket to Portland that day, there's no record of him actually using it. The ticket was never scanned, never validated for travel." Bobby could practically hear Linda's mind working, trying to process this information. "We also found it interesting," Morrison continued, "that Mr. Fleming's cell phone has been turned off since the day he supposedly left town. Most people, even those seeking a fresh start, keep their phones active for emergencies." "Maybe he bought a new phone," Ashley suggested weakly. "Maybe," Morrison agreed. "But here's what's really puzzling me. Your husband was a decorated Army Ranger, correct? Combat experience in Afghanistan. Specialized training in reconnaissance and, what did his record call it? Unconventional warfare tactics." The silence in the house was deafening. "Mrs. Fleming," Morrison said gently, "I need you to think very carefully. Is there anything your husband might have known about your relationship with Mr. Winters? Anything that might have made him angry enough to act on that anger?" Linda's voice was barely a whisper. "He didn't know. I was careful. We were careful. Ma'am, in my experience, husbands usually know more than wives think they do, especially husbands with military training in surveillance and intelligence gathering." After Morrison left, Bobby watched his family through the thermal imaging scope Marcus had provided. Linda was pacing frantically, Ashley was crying, and Tyler was throwing things in his room. The reality of their situation was finally sinking in. They had betrayed a man who possessed both the skills and the motivation to destroy them completely. That night, Bobby made his third call. "Please," Linda answered before he could speak. "Please, if this is Bobby, if you're out there, we can fix this. We can work it out." "There's nothing to fix," Bobby replied through the modulator. "You made your choice. You chose money over love, luxury over loyalty, a stranger over the father of your children. We were wrong. We were so wrong. Please just tell me what you want. I want you to understand consequences. I want you to feel what I felt when I found those text messages. When I read your plans to throw me away like garbage. When I watched my own children celebrate the idea of replacing me with a richer man. The kids didn't know. They knew enough. They knew they were helping you get rid of me. They knew there was another man. They chose sides, Linda. And they chose yours. Please don't hurt them, they're just kids. They're 17 years old enough to understand betrayal, old enough to face consequences. Bobby hung up and smiled in the darkness. Tomorrow would bring the final phase, and his family would learn the true cost of their choices. The fourth box arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a different courier service to avoid establishing patterns. This time, Linda was waiting by the window, watching for any suspicious deliveries. When the courier rang the doorbell, she was there within seconds. The box was heavier than the others, and Linda's hand shook as she carried it to the kitchen table. Ashley and Tyler gathered around her, their faces tight with anxiety. They'd been living in a state of constant terror for weeks, jumping at every sound, checking locks obsessively, barely sleeping. "Should we call Detective Morrison first?" Ashley asked. "No," Linda said firmly. "I need to know what we're dealing with." She opened the box with trembling fingers. Inside, carefully arranged in foam padding, were items that made her blood turn to ice. Gregory Winters's wallet, his keys, his phone, and a small digital camera. But it was the photographs scattered beneath these items that made Linda scream. They showed Winters in what was clearly a confined space, sitting against a metal wall with his hands zip-tied behind his back. He looked haggard, unshaven, his expensive clothes wrinkled and stained. In one photo he was holding a newspaper with yesterday's date. In another, he was looking directly at the camera with undisguised terror in his eyes. At the bottom of the box was a handwritten note in block letters. "He's alive for now. Call the number below at exactly 8 p.m. tonight. Come alone to the address provided. Bring Ashley and Tyler. If you involve police, he dies." Linda stared at the note, her world tilting on its axis. This wasn't some random stalker or extortionist. This was someone who knew about her affair, knew about Winters, knew enough to orchestrate this entire nightmare with surgical precision. "Mom," Tyler's voice was barely a whisper. "This is about Dad, isn't it?" Ashley was studying the photos with growing understanding. "The person taking these pictures, they want us to see how scared he is. They want us to know they could kill him if they wanted to." Linda's mind was racing. If Bobby was alive, if he was behind this, then everything she thought she knew about her husband was wrong. The quiet, reliable man who fixed cars and paid bills on time wasn't who she'd believed him to be. The army training she'd always dismissed as ancient history wasn't as dormant as she'd assumed. That evening, Linda drove to the address specified in the note with Ashley and Tyler in the back seat. Her children were silent, clinging to each other with a fear that made Linda's heart ache. Whatever was about to happen, she had brought this on her family through her own choices. The address led to an abandoned warehouse in an industrial district on the outskirts of Atlanta. Linda parked where the note had instructed and waited. At exactly 8 p.m., her phone rang. "Walk to the side entrance," the distorted voice commanded. "Your children stay in the car." "The note said to bring them," Linda protested. "They can see everything from where they are." "Move." Linda approached the indicated door, which opened as she reached for the handle. Inside, the warehouse was dimly lit by work lights strung from the ceiling. In the center of the space, Gregory Winters was tied to a chair, very much alive but clearly terrified. "Gregory!" Linda started toward him, but a voice from the shadows stopped her. "Stay where you are." The voice was no longer distorted. It was achingly familiar. Bobby stepped into the light and Linda gasped. He looked different. Harder, leaner, with the kind of focused intensity she'd only seen in old photographs from his military days. This wasn't the man who'd made her coffee every morning and asked about her day. This was someone dangerous. "Hello, Linda." "Bobby?" Her voice broke on his name. "Bobby, please, we can fix this. We can work this out." "Can we?" Bobby moved closer, and Linda could see that he was armed. A military-style knife strapped to his belt, something that looked like a taser in his hand. "Can we fix 18 years of marriage? Can we work out the fact that you chose money over love? That our children celebrated the idea of throwing me away?" They didn't understand. They understood enough. Bobby gestured toward the window, where Ashley and Tyler were visible in the car, watching the warehouse with terrified eyes. They understood that Gregory could give them things I couldn't. Private schools, luxury cars, social connections. They understood that their blue-collar father was an embarrassment they were happy to discard. Winters struggled against his restraints, making muffled sounds through the duct tape covering his mouth. "Oh, Gregory wants to say something," Bobby said conversationally. "Should we hear what he has to offer?" Bobby ripped the tape from Winter's mouth and the man immediately began babbling. "This is insane. Linda, call the police. He's kidnapped me, held me prisoner for weeks. He's completely lost his mind." "Have I?" Bobby asked mildly. "Let's review the facts. You seduced a married woman, convinced her to betray her husband, and manipulated her children into supporting your plan. You saw an opportunity to acquire assets through marriage while protecting your own wealth through careful legal maneuvering. You were using Linda the same way you'd use any other business tool." "That's not true," Winters protested, but his eyes avoided Linda's. "Should I show her the emails, Gregory? The ones where you bragged to your lawyer about landing the contractor's wife and gaining access to clean assets and property equity? Should I play the recording of your phone call to your brother, where you laughed about playing house with the army widow until you could upgrade to someone more suitable?" Linda's face went white. "You recorded our conversations." "I recorded everything," Bobby said. "Every text, every email, every phone call. I know about the money you transferred to the secret account. I know about the lies you told the kids about their future with Gregory. I know about your plans to file for divorce on grounds of abandonment once I was safely out of the way." The warehouse was silent, except for the sound of Linda's ragged breathing. "So, here's what's going to happen," Bobby continued. "Gregory is going to disappear permanently. His body will never be found. His death will remain a mystery." "Bobby, no," Linda whispered. "You're going to return to our house, pack your belongings and leave. The house, the business, everything I built, that stays with me. You'll take nothing except what you brought to the marriage." "You can't do this." "I can do anything I want, Linda. You gave up the protection of our marriage when you chose to betray it. You're going to discover what life is like without the foundation I provided." Bobby turned to address Winters directly. "And you, Gregory, are going to learn what happens when you try to steal another man's life." He raised the taser, and Winters began screaming. From the car, Ashley and Tyler watched their father, a man they'd thought they knew, become someone they couldn't recognize. The lesson Bobby was teaching wasn't just about consequences. It was about power, about the difference between protection and vulnerability, about what happened when you discarded the people who truly loved you in favor of those who only saw you as useful. The screaming stopped. Bobby walked back to Linda, his face calm and composed. 24 hours, he said quietly. You and the kids have 24 hours to be gone. After that, anyone still in my house becomes part of the problem I need to solve. Linda stumbled toward the door, her world shattered beyond repair. Behind her, Gregory Winters sat slumped in his chair, very still and very quiet. Bobby Fleming had finally come home. Detective Ray Morrison sat in his patrol car outside the Fleming house, watching Linda load suitcases into her BMW with mechanical precision. Through his binoculars, he could see that the woman was in shock, moving through the motions of packing but clearly not fully present. Her children were helping, their faces pale and drawn, jumping at every small sound. Morrison had been a cop for 23 years, and he'd developed an instinct for when cases were about to break wide open. The Fleming situation had all the markers. A missing person with no leads, a family that wasn't telling him everything, and now this sudden departure in the middle of the night. His radio crackled. Unit 47, we have reports of screaming from the Warehouse District Industrial Complex on Riverside Drive. Morrison frowned. That was the same area where Gregory Winters' abandoned car had been found weeks ago. Unit 47 responding, he said, starting his engine. As he drove away, he didn't see Bobby Fleming emerge from the shadows behind the Fleming house, watching Linda and the kids with cold satisfaction. Bobby had been monitoring police communications all night, waiting for this moment. At the warehouse, Morrison found nothing but tire tracks and the faint smell of fear in the air. Someone had been here recently, but whoever they were had cleaned up after themselves with professional thoroughness. Still, his instincts were screaming that something significant had happened in this place. Meanwhile, Linda finished loading the last of their belongings. Ashley and Tyler stood by the car, looking lost and frightened. "Where are we going, Mom?" Ashley asked for the third time. "I don't know," Linda admitted. "A hotel for now, until I can figure out what to do." Tyler was staring at the house where he'd grown up. "Is Dad really going to kill us if we stay?" Linda remembered the look in Bobby's eyes at the warehouse, the casual way he'd handled weapons that she'd forgotten he knew how to use. The man she'd been married to for 18 years had been capable of violence all along. She'd just been protected from ever seeing it. "Yes," she said quietly. "I think he might." They drove away just as Bobby walked through the front door of his house for the first time in a month. Everything was exactly as he'd left it, except for the spaces where Linda and the kids had removed their personal belongings. Their absence felt like a cleansing, like excising infected tissue from a wound. In his workshop, Bobby began the methodical process of disposing of evidence. The surveillance equipment went into a vat of acid. The phones and electronics were destroyed with a military-grade electromagnet. The weapons and restraints were disassembled and scattered across 3 different counties. Gregory Winters' body would never be found because there was no body to find. The man was very much alive, though profoundly changed by his experience. Bobby had driven him to a bus station in Jacksonville and given him enough money to disappear permanently. The choice Winters faced was simple: start a new life somewhere far away under a new identity, or stay and face murder charges for crimes Bobby would ensure he was framed for. Winters had chosen to disappear, understanding that Bobby Fleming was not a man who made idle threats. Over the next several days, Bobby systematically rebuilt his life. He changed the locks on the house, updated his business insurance to reflect his new single status, and began the legal process of filing for divorce on grounds of abandonment and adultery. The evidence of Linda's affair, carefully documented over months of surveillance, made the divorce proceedings swift and decisive. She had no legal standing to claim any of the assets Bobby had built before and during their marriage. The house, the business, the savings accounts, everything remained with Bobby. Linda's attempts to reach him were futile. The old phone numbers were disconnected, his email addresses were changed, and even his business contact information was updated to route through an answering service with strict instructions about screening calls. Detective Morrison continued investigating, but without physical evidence or credible witnesses, the Gregory Winters case went cold. The man had simply vanished, leaving behind only questions and theories. Morrison suspected Bobby Fleming's involvement, but suspicion wasn't evidence, and evidence was what he needed to build a case. 3 weeks after the warehouse confrontation, Morrison made one final attempt to locate Bobby. He drove to the Fleming house and knocked on the door. Bobby answered, looking relaxed and well-rested for the first time in months. "Detective Morrison," Bobby said pleasantly. "What can I do for you, Mr. Fleming?" "I was told you'd been traveling. Portland, Oregon, wasn't it?" "Change of plans," Bobby said easily. "Decided I prefer Georgia, after all. Amazing how much you can miss home when you're away from it." Morrison studied Bobby's face, searching for tells, for signs of deception or guilt. What he saw was a man who appeared completely at peace with himself and his circumstances. "Have you had any contact with Gregory Winters recently?" Morrison asked directly. "Never met the man," Bobby replied, "though I understand he was dating my ex-wife for a while." "Small world." "Your ex-wife?" "Divorce was finalized last week. Linda decided she wanted a different kind of life. I was happy to give it to her." Morrison left without getting the answers he'd come for, but with the uncomfortable certainty that he'd just interviewed a very dangerous man who had covered his tracks with professional skill. That evening, Bobby stood in his workshop, surrounded by the tools and machinery that had been his livelihood for 15 years. The space felt different now, cleaner, more focused, freed from the weight of obligations to people who had never truly valued what he provided. His phone rang. A new client with a 1967 Mustang that needed complete restoration. Bobby smiled as he took down the details. Life was returning to normal, or perhaps to what normal should have been all along. Outside, it began to rain, washing away the last traces of a life that had never really been his. 6 months after the warehouse confrontation, Linda Fleming sat in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Mont, Georgia, staring at a stack of bills she couldn't pay. Her real estate license had been suspended pending an ethics investigation triggered by anonymous complaints about her professional conduct. Without income and with legal fees from the divorce mounting, she was facing financial ruin. Ashley had been forced to withdraw from her private school and enroll in the local public high school, where she struggled to adapt to an environment far removed from the privilege she'd been promised. Tyler had developed anxiety attacks and spent most of his time in his room, refusing to talk about what he'd witnessed that night at the warehouse. The worst part was the isolation. Gregory Winters had vanished completely, leaving no forwarding address and no explanation. Linda's friends from her previous life had distanced themselves once the divorce became public, and the details of her affair emerged. She'd lost everything. Her husband, her home, her financial security, her social standing, in pursuit of a fantasy that had evaporated the moment Bobby revealed his true nature. Meanwhile, Bobby Fleming was thriving. His automotive restoration business had expanded, taking on higher-end clients who appreciated his meticulous attention to detail and absolute reliability. Word had spread through Atlanta's classic car community about his exceptional work, and he was booked solid for the next 18 months. Detective Morrison had officially closed the Gregory Winters case as a missing person investigation, filing it away with hundreds of other unsolved disappearances. Without evidence of foul play and with no new leads developing, the department couldn't justify continued resources on what might simply be a man who'd chosen to disappear. But Morrison hadn't forgotten Bobby Fleming. He'd made a point of driving past the Fleming house occasionally, noting the improvements Bobby was making to the property. The expensive cars that arrived for restoration work, the signs of a man who was not just surviving, but prospering in his new circumstances. On a warm October evening, Morrison decided to pay Bobby another visit. He found him in the workshop, carefully applying primer to the fender of a vintage Corvette. "Beautiful car," Morrison said, admiring the craftsmanship. Bobby looked up, showing no surprise at the detective's appearance. 1963 split window. Owner's been looking for someone to restore it for 3 years. Finally decided I was worth the wait. Business is good, better than it's ever been. Amazing how much more focused you can be when you're not distracted by family drama. Morrison leaned against the workbench, studying Bobby's face. "I hear your ex-wife is having some financial difficulties." "I wouldn't know," Bobby said, returning to his work. "We don't communicate. The kids either?" Bobby's hand paused for just a moment before continuing the smooth strokes of primer. "Ashley and Tyler made their choices. They're old enough to live with the consequences." "They're your children, Bobby. DNA doesn't obligate anyone to anything, Detective. Those kids celebrated the idea of replacing me with a richer man. They actively participated in a plan to manipulate me into abandoning my own family. Why would I want a relationship with people like that?" Morrison had no answer for that. In his experience, most people held on to family relationships even when they were toxic or harmful. Bobby's willingness to completely sever ties with his children was unusual, and it reinforced Morrison's belief that Bobby was capable of extreme actions when he felt betrayed. "What about Gregory Winters?" Morrison asked. "Any theories about what happened to him?" Bobby set down his brush and looked at Morrison directly. "My theory is that Gregory Winters was a predator who made the mistake of targeting the wrong family. Predators have enemies, Detective. Eventually, one of those enemies catches up with them." "Is that what happened?" "I have no idea what happened to Gregory Winters. I was in Portland, Oregon, remember? You have the bus ticket to prove it." Morrison left the workshop feeling more frustrated than ever. Bobby Fleming was either innocent of any involvement in Winters' disappearance, or he was one of the most skillful criminals Morrison had ever encountered. Either way, without evidence, there was nothing more the detective could do. That night, Bobby made a phone call to Marcus Chun. "How's our friend in Jacksonville?" Bobby asked. "Keeping his head down," Marcus replied. "Got a job at an auto parts store under his new name. Living in an efficiency apartment, rides the bus to work. He's learned to be very, very careful about his choices." "Good. Any other matters?" "The surveillance on your ex-wife continues. She's struggling financially but hasn't made any attempts to contact you or cause problems. The kids are having a harder time adjusting. The daughter is showing signs of depression, and the son is having panic attacks." Bobby felt no sympathy. Linda, Ashley, and Tyler were experiencing the natural consequences of their choices. They'd thrown away the security and protection of their family in pursuit of something shinier and more exciting. Now they were learning what life was like without that foundation. Any indication they're planning to cause trouble? None. They seem to understand that their best option is to stay away from you completely. Bobby smiled. Fear was an excellent teacher, and his family had received a comprehensive education in the dangers of betrayal. What about Detective Morrison? Still asking questions occasionally, but the case is officially cold. He suspects you, but suspicion isn't evidence. As long as you maintain your current pattern and don't do anything to draw attention, you're clear. After ending the call, Bobby walked through his house, appreciating the silence and order. Every room was exactly as he wanted it. Every decision was his alone to make. Every dollar he earned belonged to him. He'd achieved something that many men only dreamed of. Complete freedom from the obligations and compromises that had defined his adult life. The cost had been high: his marriage, his relationship with his children, his faith in family loyalty. But the price had been worth paying. Bobby Fleming had learned that love and loyalty were luxuries that could only exist in the presence of mutual respect and commitment. When those foundations crumbled, what remained was the simple arithmetic of power and consequence. In the morning, he would continue building the life he had chosen, free from the weight of people who had proven themselves unworthy of his protection and provision. It was a life of his own design, accountable to no one but himself. For the first time in 20 years, Bobby Fleming was exactly where he wanted to be. 2 years had passed since the warehouse confrontation, and Bobby Fleming had settled into a routine that suited him perfectly. His days began at 5 a.m., with a workout in the gym he'd built in his basement, followed by coffee and the news. Then, 8 hours in his workshop restoring vintage automobiles for clients who paid premium prices for his expertise. Evenings were spent reading, planning future projects, or maintaining the extensive security system he'd installed around his property. He'd learned to value solitude, to find satisfaction in work done well, and to appreciate the simple pleasure of answering to no one but himself. The scars from his family's betrayal had healed into something harder and more resilient. Bobby no longer thought about Linda, Ashley, or Tyler as people he'd once loved. They had become cautionary examples of why trust required careful cultivation and constant vigilance. On a Tuesday morning in March, his doorbell rang. Through his security cameras, Bobby saw Ashley standing on his front porch, looking nervous and much older than her 19 years. She'd lost weight. Her clothes were inexpensive and ill-fitting, and there were dark circles under her eyes that spoke of chronic stress and poor sleep. Bobby considered ignoring her entirely, but curiosity won out. He activated the intercom system. "What do you want, Ashley?" She looked directly at the camera, tears already forming in her eyes. "Dad, please, I need to talk to you. We have nothing to discuss. Please, just 5 minutes. I know you hate us, but I'm begging you. Please." Against his better judgment, Bobby opened the door. Ashley looked even worse up close. Thin, pale, wearing clothes that had clearly come from a thrift store. The privileged teenager who'd celebrated his departure had been replaced by a young woman who'd learned harsh lessons about the real world. 5 minutes, Bobby said coldly. Ashley stepped inside, looking around the house she'd grown up in with obvious longing. Bobby had redecorated extensively, removing every trace of her and Tyler's presence. The family photos were gone, replaced by military memorabilia and automotive art. It was no longer a family home, it was a bachelor's domain. "The house looks good," she said quietly. "What do you want, Ashley?" She took a shaky breath. "Mom's in the hospital." She hesitated. She took pills. Tyler found her and called 911. Bobby felt nothing. "I'm sorry to hear that, but it's not my problem. She's asking for you. The doctors say she might not make it, and she keeps saying your name. Linda made her choices. The consequences of those choices are hers to face." Ashley's composure cracked. "She's dying, Dad. She's dying, and she's calling for you, and you don't even care." "Should I care? Should I care about a woman who plotted to throw me away like garbage, who turned my own children against me, who chose a stranger's money over her husband's love?" "We were wrong," Ashley sobbed. "We were so wrong, and we've paid for it every day since you left. Tyler can't sleep. He has nightmares about that night at the warehouse. Mom hasn't been able to hold a job. She drinks too much. She cries all the time. We lost everything, Dad, everything." Bobby's expression didn't change. "Good." The word hit Ashley like a physical blow. "You really hate us that much?" "Hate is an emotion that requires investment," Bobby said calmly. "I don't hate you, Ashley. I simply don't care what happens to you. You're strangers to me now. Strangers who once caused me great pain, but who are no longer relevant to my life. We're your family. Family doesn't plot to destroy each other. Family doesn't celebrate each other's exile. Family doesn't choose money over love." Bobby moved toward the door. "You have 2 minutes left." Ashley was crying openly now. "I was 17, Dad. I was 17, and I believed what Mom told me about you being happier without us. I thought we were doing something good for you. You thought you were upgrading to a better life with Gregory Winters. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending this was about my happiness." "You're right," Ashley whispered. "You're right, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for all of it. But Tyler and I, we were kids. We were stupid and selfish, and we followed Mom's lead, but we were kids. You were old enough to understand betrayal, old enough to make choices, old enough to live with consequences." Ashley looked around the house one more time, taking in the complete absence of any sign that a family had ever lived there. "Will you come see her, please? Just once before it's too late." Bobby opened the front door. "Time's up." Ashley walked toward the door, then turned back. "I know you'll never forgive us. I know we destroyed something that can't be fixed. But I want you to know that losing you has been the worst thing that ever happened to us. Worse than being poor. Worse than people looking down on us. Worse than anything. We had something real with you, and we threw it away for something that was never real at all." "Yes," Bobby agreed. "You did." Ashley left without another word. Bobby watched through his security cameras as she walked to a beat-up Honda Civic and drove away. He noticed that she didn't even have a cell phone. She was living at a level of poverty that made basic communication a luxury. That evening, Bobby researched Linda's condition through contacts at the hospital. She was stable, but had suffered significant liver damage from the overdose. The doctors expected her to recover physically, though the psychological damage would likely persist. He also learned that Tyler had dropped out of a high school and was working at a fast food restaurant to help support his mother and sister. The boy, who'd once been embarrassed by his father's blue-collar work, was now discovering the reality of minimum wage labor. Bobby felt no satisfaction in their suffering. It was simply the natural result of their choices. As inevitable as gravity or erosion, they had chosen to destroy their family's foundation, and now they were experiencing life without that support. 3 days later, Detective Morrison called to inform Bobby that Gregory Winters had been found dead in Jacksonville, an apparent suicide in his efficiency apartment. The man had left no note, but neighbors reported that he'd seemed increasingly paranoid and unstable in recent weeks. "Thought you should know," Morrison said. "Case is officially closed now." Bobby thanked him for the information and hung up. Gregory Winters had learned too late that some choices carried permanent consequences. The man who'd thought he could casually destroy another man's family had discovered that predators sometimes became prey. That night, Bobby stood in his workshop, surrounded by the tools and projects that had become his world. The vintage Mustang he was restoring gleamed under the work lights. Every detail perfect. Every component precisely where it belonged. He thought about Ashley's visit, about Linda's overdose, about Tyler's minimum wage job, and Gregory Winters' suicide. The wreckage of his former life was complete now. And from that wreckage, Bobby had built something stronger and more honest. He'd learned that love without respect was worthless, that family without loyalty was meaningless, that protection without appreciation was wasted effort. His ex-wife and children had taught him these lessons through their betrayal, and he was grateful for the education. Bobby Fleming had been forged in the crucible of betrayal, and had emerged as something harder, cleaner, and more purposeful. He owed no debts, harbored no illusions, and made no compromises. It was a lonely life, but it was an authentic one. In the distance, church bells chimed midnight, marking the beginning of another day in a life that belonged entirely to him. Bobby smiled and returned to his work, content in the knowledge that he would never again be vulnerable to the kind of betrayal that had once nearly destroyed him. The last lesson had been learned, and the student had become the master of his own fate.